Hi, everyone. Looks like so far we have about 20 some odd people. So um, we're just going to hang on for a bit until 6:30 East Coast time and get started.
Hello.
Hi. Okay, it's time to get started. Welcome everyone to the ACSA conversation on design build studios and community engagement. I'm Jeff Day. I am a professor of architecture and landscape architecture at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. I'm also an at-large board member with ACSA, and Joyce Hwang and I have decided to co-host this discussion. Joyce, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Joyce Hwang. I am an associate professor and associate chair of the architecture department at the University of Buffalo School of Architecture and Planning. I was excited to join this session with Jeff, particularly because I'm teaching a design build studio this semester, but we can get into the details of that a little bit later. I direct a practice called Ants of the Prairie, also based in Buffalo.
Thanks, Joyce. So, we aren't preparing a lecture here by any means. This is really a conversation, hopefully with a number of folks with similar concerns or issues with the studios and courses we're teaching right now. So Joyce and I thought we would start by talking about what's going on in our own studios, and then we'll open it up for conversation with everyone. Just a couple of ground rules. It'd be great if everyone could stay muted until you're talking, just so that we don't challenge our bandwidth too much, and also keep the background noise down. And then if you use the raise hand feature, and if you don't know about that, go down to the bottom of your window and click on Manage Participants, which opens up a list of all the participants. At the bottom of that, there's a button where you can raise your hand and use that to signal that you want to say something, and then we'll kind of moderate that from the side here. Beyond that, I think we'll just sort of maintain a pretty open conversation and sharing ideas about these challenges with what I think is a particularly challenging studio type to move online. I've never seen anyone build anything remotely online, so we'll see how that goes. But just in terms of what I'm doing, I have two different practices. I run an architecture office called the Actual Architecture Company, and a design build program I've been running for about 18 years called FACT at Nebraska. The particular agenda that I have with FACT is to have students engage with real projects almost entirely with outside clients and engaging with outside fabricators and so on. I'm not necessarily interested in having the students do all of the construction work themselves or all the fabrication work, but having them be involved with the participants that they need to bring together to realize challenging projects. Some of these projects last for many years. So this particular semester, my studio, which has 16 students, is actually working on 4 different projects. One is more like an independent study that's one student is handling. Another is a design for a rehab of a small 900 square foot building to become an art education facility for a challenging neighborhood in Lincoln, Nebraska. And that project is currently near the end of construction documents. The other 2 projects are at the same institution, the Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts in Omaha. The image behind me and in this virtual background is one of the projects we built about 10 years ago. We're building the second phase of an experimental music venue. Students are actively, or were actively on site doing construction about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, when we got notice that we were going to be moving to virtual instruction. And there's another piece at the same institution that is in the sort of shop drawing and documentation phase. So we're trying to quickly pivot. We start classes on Monday after an extended 2-week spring break. And we will be obviously working entirely online. My university prohibits any physical in-person interaction that's directed for coursework. So I can't have students working on site, whether they're doing it officially or unofficially for the course. So everything is shifting to a virtual experience, working with fabricators on by Zoom or other means, and so on. And I can talk about it more later if necessary. Joyce, do you want to talk a little bit about your semester?
Sure. So as I said, I am teaching at the University of Buffalo School of Architecture and Planning. I'm teaching a graduate studio in the Ecological Practices Graduate Research Group. The project that we've been working on this semester is the second semester of a year-long project to engage with a place called Silo City, which is a 14-acre piece of land that's owned by a neighboring metal manufacturing company called Rigidized Metals. And Rigidized Metals is the project sponsor and collaborative partner on the project. The engagement has been that last semester the students worked on the schematic design development part of the project. There were a number of different projects that were actually being developed. And this semester, the bulk of the work has been, or at least the intention has been, to build the project, which is being designed as a 60-foot diameter tree training trellis to train willow trees to grow in a particular way to help remediate the land as well, dealing with a number of invasive species like Japanese knotweed on the land. And so we are currently at the moment, because we did spend last semester working on the design of the project, and the last semester's project was led by one of my colleagues, Laura Garofalo. I took over this semester during the design build portion. Because the design happened mostly last semester, we were able to spend the first half of the semester doing a lot of full-scale mock-ups, such as this thing that you see behind me in my background image. This is an image of my studio before we had to move out. There currently, as of this past Monday, this March 23rd, we've been 100% online. Our school had about 1 week to transition to being online, which was essentially our spring break. And I've had to develop a number of contingency plans for this. At the moment, we're 100% online, but there is the possibility of revisiting the situation in the beginning of April to see whether or not there would be the possibility of doing some form of in-person work, but that's something that's not known right now. So one of the kind of contingency plans also is to explore some of the possible protocols and rules for what would happen if students or I were allowed to work in situ. An interesting addition to this is that Rigidized Metals, our project partner, is a construction company or a fabrication metal manufacturing company. So the company itself has actually been deemed an essential business in New York State. So they are actually still open and operating, although with most of their non-manufacturing staff at home. So they do have people still on there making things. So one of the kind of pivots of this semester that has happened really quickly is that rather than working on drawings to the extent that we as the studio can understand them and use them to build, we're now working on shop drawings to the level of enabling the fabricators, not just the Rigidized Metals fabricators, but others who might not necessarily be trained in fabrication, to read them and build with them. So yeah, so that's I guess the summary of what I've been up to. Great.
Right. Yeah, thanks, Joyce. I think that we're all going to have to make pretty significant pivots if we're teaching in any kind of making-based studio. But we're also talking here about community engagement, which sometimes is not involved in construction. So we don't want to suggest that everybody here is interested in how building projects are going to move forward or not, but how we work with community-based partners. In many cases, when students and partners are working in-person meetings and charrettes, whatever it might be, community engagement projects often are framed around some kind of physical presence. So with that not possible, I think the questions of how we continue and how the students can manage to get student outcomes that we were intending, or some variation of that, but then also how we can be of value to the partner and still produce something that's useful for them. So anyway, I think we'd like to open it up to conversation and questions. So if anyone has a burning issue, raise your hand and we will call attention to you. I'm mindful of the fact that I've got a very long list of 62 people here, so I'm scanning to the bottom as well.
Also, feel free to write in the chat box. So the way that we're organizing, I think, is that Jeff is looking at the hand raising and I'm looking at the chat box right now.
Okay, just like with my students, if no one says anything, no names.
Well, maybe we can, I guess I'm wondering, maybe some of the things that I started thinking about is like, maybe we can organize this around different topics of concern if nobody has questions immediately or issues that they want to raise. I'm looking through the list and I see a number of familiar faces, people who have been, I see some of my colleagues here as well. But I think one of the questions I think for me has been, okay, so if you are 100% online, what are some of the lessons that that are crucial to, to institute hands-on learning that can be managed in an online way? And that's something that I'm struggling with, trying to kind of figure out what that is. And then the other question that I am kind of struggling with as well is, so if there is the possibility of having students work together, what kind of protocols do we put in place to really kind of put their health and safety at the forefront? See Michael. Jeff, I think there's some.
Yeah, Michael, you're muted right now.
Michael, you're muted. Jeff, you can also unmute them yourself.
Yeah. Should be unmuted now.
What?
Hello?
Somebody talking?
Michael,
Well,
is that
was,
you?
but I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Okay.
I'm from San Diego, the New School of Architecture and Design. I am heavily involved in our studio with community engagement. And I'm just not sure how to continue that for the rest of the year when I can't get the students working together with the community, and how you handle that, some of that online, because our partners online are community members who will not lend themselves easily to reacting online. They're not professionals. They're not all tied in with digital communications, and how we, I'm just interested in the protocols, how we can gather together and get out there again. And that maybe that's something we just can't answer now.
Well, I think in the case of my studio, the community is really a collection of nonprofit organizations. And so the numbers of people we're dealing with are smaller, and they're also, unlike your situation, rather, adept at Zoom meetings or any of these sorts of media. So we don't have that challenge. I think that is in some ways one of the biggest challenges. I mean, I don't know if your meetings with your community members were, large groups, or that's particularly difficult since we can't do that. And everyone's in their own location. It may be that some situations are just not going to be possible and would have to be put off until, hopefully sometime that we have a little bit more facility to, ability to get out.
Well, that's what I'm trying to think of, how to restructure.
Yeah, I think in my case, the construction work immediately came to a halt. And so what we're doing is the students are going to be working with a contractor who they were already collaborating with, but he's going to still be working on site by himself. Students are going to be feeding him, drawings, models, and design ideas. But he's going to be doing all the work until, if there is a time that we can come back to work, which I honestly don't think is going to happen here. Our university is closed, in-person instruction down for the entire semester, regardless of what might happen. So we're just trying to find a way to keep the students engaged and keep the project moving forward, knowing that it's not going to be the same experience.
Yeah, I think one of the things that has kept me hopeful in the last week is that I've seen an enormous learning curve happen with people who probably wouldn't otherwise be using platforms like Zoom to really jump on and use Zoom very quickly. including many of my relatives. And I think I think it would, you know, if you're not able to engage with them in a digital way, there must be other ways to engage, like maybe over the phone, I imagine. But I'm finding Zoom in particular to be very helpful, just to, you know, just to talk with people, to connect in different ways. I feel fortunate in that my studio's collaborators do use digital platforms, and we're collaborating with a structural engineer as well, who also, you know, works digitally all the time. So he's actually jumping on our Zoom call on Monday to look at foundation details. But I'm finding this, you know, as distant as it is, to be very hopeful that people that probably wouldn't use this platform are using it very quickly all of a sudden.
Nadia had some ideas to share. So maybe we'll start with Nadia, and then Michael Zaretsky and Donald King are next with hands up.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I was prepping dinner earlier, so now I can jump in. And I don't know, you know, Michael, I'm in a similar situation. I'm teaching an engaged design studio and working with, you know, low income community, and it's we had planned a series. I mean, we had one, but we had planned a series of workshops where we were going to have, you know, feedback from community members, and then be able to go to local kind of public locations and be able to garner feedback, and then build on that feedback to progress the design and so on. And now that's just not possible, and primarily because a good portion of our you know, the constituency that we would be working with don't have access. And we're particularly interested in engaging, you know, with older people who have been, you know, in the community for a long time and have seen change happen. And not only are they, of course, you know, the people that are most at risk, but also, you know, they're the least likely to have access to computer technology. So in speaking both with my students, and then also we are working with a local land trust that has some residents on its board, as well as architects and you know, property owners, and a decent range of people, that we are going to try to have some online, you know, I hate to call them review, I mean, discussions with some of the board members around that. And then my students actually generated the idea. They were concerned that if we spend too much time sort of spinning wheels, that their design work will suffer. And so one of the things that they're really interested in doing is figuring out some systems for how to communicate the work after the end of the semester, so that whether it's putting videos online or preparing materials for a future workshop that might be able to happen over the summer. And it's really been an ongoing discussion about communication, which I think is a big part of you know, engagement work. And so that has been, I guess, you know, it's not a perfect solution, but I think it's taken the discussions of the studio in a direction, you know, where it normally wouldn't go, and thinking about, you know, how do we communicate work? How do we think about different, you know, we can post videos, we can do printed kinds of things, and also about how to potentially create, you know, survey tools that, for example, you know, younger people all have cell phones. And is there a way to create interaction and say, hey, go talk to your grandmother, and get feedback like that? So I don't know that it's a perfect, there's certainly not perfect solutions, and I don't know how well it's going to go. But that's sort of what we're going to try. And if nothing else, I think it's made the students really sort of conscious of what some of the barriers or the communication difficulties that we would deal with anyway. And so in this case, maybe sheds light on it in a different way.
Great,
So
thanks.
there are a number of comments showing up in the chat window. So if you're looking at that, I encourage you to open that. There are some folks who are posting some links that can be very helpful. One person who has offered who wants to raise her hand is, sorry, I can't really see this, Ronit Eisenbach. Would you like to say something?
Hi. Can you see me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. My name is Ronit. Teach at University of Maryland, and I've done design build studios. This studio was supposed to be both a design build and a community engaged studio. So just a couple of thoughts of things we're doing. One, we're working with a neighborhood design center in our community. And so if anybody's near a neighborhood design center, even if you haven't reached out to them, they may already have done some of the work with the community members and are in contact with the leaders. And so some of the things that we've been thinking about is closed circuit TV, local radio stations, giving flyers out with food deliveries to people. And so some kind of like low tech ways like that, but also thinking about what are the resources that are already in the community and that those could be accessed. And then we're, ironically, our project is a partnership with Kaiser Permanente and is dealing with health and the environment. So ironically, and also probably a really great thing. And so we've been thinking about what, in terms of time, like what the situation is right now, what an interim situation is, and what is a future situation in the community that we're working in. It's a very large immigrant population. And it's affected by a new light rail construction in DC. So that was really what we were looking at is community aspirations for the change, the physical change in the community as a result of the new infrastructure. And so we're kind of pivoting the question of the studio a little bit to be about, at this moment when people are asked to stay apart, how can we use the design process to build community and keep spirits lifted? And how can we strengthen the bonds that are there in order to be ready to tackle what's next? So for example, one of the projects is a new community cafe, which was planned. And so we're going to be working on, and we were going to be doing design build for that. We'll be working on images of that and then projecting them in the community and maybe through the TV, we're not sure yet, to create a virtual cafe, which will then have the kind of gatherings and tapping into the artists and the musicians, and then the students' renderings and kind of images of what this thing could be become the temporary thing, but also then we're hoping through the resources and connections through the design center, we can, it can be a feedback loop as well as creating kind of the virtual environment for these connections. And similarly, we're working at the urban scale. So we're building a SketchUp model, which will have proposals for what could happen in the different spaces and trying to see if we might be able to partner with some of the schools and the teachers so that the kids in the community who might have access could possibly be responding to or even drawing out, and a couple of things like that. So thinking about the renderings and things we're making now as creating virtual environments to bring people together in the future. And also phones is a thing that people have more easy access to and using those tools. So.
Great, thanks. Let's go to Michael Zaretsky, who's been waiting for a bit.
Hi, everyone. I'm at the University of Texas at Arlington and co-teaching a community engagement design build studio here. And it's actually the first one of these I've done here. I haven't been here for that long. And we started this amazing relationship with the city of Arlington and working in a Hispanic community in East Arlington. and had this incredible start with these engagement activities. Everyone was so excited, and it's so hard to see that suddenly end. And I know a lot of people are dealing with that because these are not communities who we can hop on a Zoom call with, like other people have mentioned. We did do a survey that had a lot more response than we thought it would as a part of our initial engagement. So we are going to do some more surveys, and are also in touch with a lot of the community leaders to sort of ask them to help communicate things to the rest of the people we've been working with. What I'm interested in really getting some input on from folks here is the other side, the design build side, because the students we're working with really do not have a lot of experience with materials and sort of understanding what we get out of a design build studio. And, you know, we're trying to get them to sort of dive into testing of ideas at a sort of detail scale, focusing on issues of tectonics and using digital tools, but it's just so much harder than when you're using real materials. And if anyone has thoughts, resources, suggestions on how to transfer some of the things we're all trying to teach in a design build studio to a digital studio, I would really appreciate that input. Thanks.
Yeah, I think those are really interesting issues. Eric Summerfield had some suggestions technologically, software, down in the chat. So I think everyone should take a look at the chat at some point, either now or at the end. You know, I think that there's a difference between maybe getting the project built and using different means to do that, and meeting this, you know, your goals for your students, which might be, you know, having a student actually work with materials to understand the limitations. That is, I mean, I would say very difficult to achieve unless they have tools in their backyard that they can work with, or materials. The other side, getting the project done, there's definitely a lot of technology, as Eric mentioned, Bluebeam and Navisworks and other ways of engaging with a project, but it's not the same thing as physical presence and understanding what a material can do or not. See, Donald King, I think you are the next person up.
Sure. Hi, all. Donald King, University of Washington College of Built Environments, affiliate professor of architecture there. We're in Seattle, of course, and the first epicenter in the US for the coronavirus. So we began to take some fairly serious measures to combat it. I see I'm joined by other colleagues from College of Built Environments, Brandon Bourne and Steve Bedaines and Tyler Sprague and Jeff Howe, I see. So be happy to hear from any of you on the experience that you're having in preparing for a 100% online spring quarter that the University of Washington is going into. And in particular with some of the professors that I'm working with and engaging in community dialogue, how we can really take this crisis that we're in as an opportunity to expand our tools, you know, really expand the tools for communication, expand the tools for reaching and probably even broadening the audience in community engagement. So I was happy to see the conversation go that way. I don't want to dwell on that for too long unless others want to join me in that. But I do believe, instead of say just bemoaning the fact that we can't do face-to-face, find the tools and the resources and the experience that we already have had in not having that happen, and also being able to reach those that we probably haven't reached before because we haven't been able to bring them in either to the university or bring them to the community meetings that we've had with those that may be technology savvy for Facebook, for using of their smartphones, for other internet connections. Zoom is very easy to learn. And as I said, I believe we can actually expand and reach more people through this process. And we've begun to talk about it, which is something we have to really get used to, because we begin our quarter in a few days on March 30th, but really have a lot of focus towards community engagement and need to find out how we use this and take this experience for the good.
Great, thank you. Jeff Howe?
Yes, Jeff Howe here, also from University of Washington, Seattle. It's great to see many familiar faces and also new friends. So I just want to share a couple ideas, and this may or may not work for everybody. Years ago, I've done distance collaboration studios in which our students work with another cohort overseas and who have access to a particular community. So basically, putting students together who have different access to different kind of resources or communities. And so I think in this situation, I mean, it may take a lot of effort to set it up, but you could potentially find a partner somewhere else on the planet that's where, like social distancing is not an issue, that people can still talk to each other in close proximity. And they will be the one that could help kind of engage with the community, and then students can collaborate remotely to figure out ways to develop a meaningful design out of that sort of engagement. So it's not ideal, but it might be an interesting approach given the circumstance. So that's one idea. Another idea that I thought about is, we've been talking about different ways that people can interact online, both in the kind of synchronous kind of fashion and asynchronous fashion. So I think potentially you could set up something on site and allow people to go and provide input, one at a time, not all together. And but over a period of time, you could accumulate enough input, or it could be an installation as well. So this could potentially apply to design build as well, that people take and ship to go to the site and work on a project, maybe one at a time, or maybe a small group that you can still practice social distancing. And so that would allow a project to unfold over a period of time. So that might be a possibility. So just share a couple of ideas.
Yeah, I think those are interesting points. At my university, and I asked this question of our dean, we are absolutely prohibited from requiring a student to do anything in person outside of their home. So I can't have a student go to a construction site, even if it's on their own. If I assign students to work together in a team on Zoom and they decide on their own to go and have a meeting at someone's apartment, that's on them, but we can't police that. But the challenge is, if a student goes out and does construction and then I give them a grade for doing that, then I'm sort of complicit in having them get out. And so we're really discouraged from letting that happen at my university anyway. And I know that some schools have slightly different approaches to this. Things may evolve over time.
Yeah, in our school, we cannot require students to meet anywhere. In fact, at the moment, as I mentioned, everything's 100% online. But even if we do get the go-ahead to have any in-person work happen anywhere at all, we can't require any students to do it. So even in that case, we have to develop several different tracks or different projects or different ways that students would be able to work on different things where, and I'm sort of projecting, if we were able to do anything at all, that there would be people who would go do certain things with a number of very strict protocols in place, but then there would be other students working on a different project that wouldn't require any in-person work at all. I see Sarah Aziz has her hand up.
Hello. Hi everyone. So I'm at Texas Tech University, where I'm leading a design build studio called Tumbleweed Radio. It requires students to sustainably construct a number of public structures with their communities using free region-specific materials such as tumbleweed and adobe. So with the news of the pandemic and the closure of the college, my students became extremely disenchanted at the prospect of moving the project to a digital environment. And then to address Michael's question and the concerns surrounding material presence and the lack of it, And we're transitioning to a model where each student designs and builds a tool for building with tumbleweeds. And the hope is that these machines will expedite the construction process should we have the opportunity to return to our site at a later date. So my question is, does anyone have any experience or advice with teaching students how to construct tools for design build projects?
Great question. I don't personally have an answer to that. Does anyone have any suggestions for Sarah's question?
And I think that's a really interesting question. I like this idea of working in a one-to-one way, using whatever in a kind of old school way to some extent. I think somebody was also commenting about this in the chat box as well, like how to make tools where you can work, where you're working on your own. I think that's I guess it would be tough to say without really knowing more about the project, but it also depends on where one is, but I think one could be pretty innovative, finding existing materials or something in your backyard to do certain things, but that would be so, I mean, that would be a very interesting project, but that would probably turn the entire project objective completely upside down from where it was originally.
Yeah, I think that's really what I started dealing with is, how radically do we change what we're doing, and how do we maintain some sense of the original objectives? So we have one hand up right now. So W. Bailey, where is that? I don't see this person.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I have been doing this a lot in the corporate world, and I've been teaching at Temple University for computers and facilities and design, all that sort of stuff. But responding to one of the questions, there's a lot of tools out there. I would be concerned about trying to reinvent the wheel rather than finding some incredible tools available to us right now and bring those more quickly into the college environment. I know there's always an issue dealing with the IT department to be able to learn and support new applications, but there's a bunch out there. And I always tell people, just pick one or two and learn it and go do it. I know it's not that simple, but I'm a big enthusiast of technology, bringing technology to the community. I think that's really vital today.
I mean, one thought I had also with regard to some of the thoughts previously was that there are certain types of ways of simulating a mock-up at home. And while my students haven't done this, this is something they could do. They are, as you can see in the structure, well, it's actually hard to tell, but they're making a pretty large tree training trellis that has a lot of different conduits that are being bent, that are crossing, and they're developing all these different lashes to hold things together. And one of the things that they've been doing in studio prior to closure or prior to going online is developing all these kind of connection details in lashing and then trying to figure out how to make things kind of stable in a certain way. So these have been small scale tests that I think could fit on a, that can fit on a desk, that can fit on I mean, they're pretty small. They're like this big and not that much bigger. And I can imagine that if your student hasn't gone online yet, and that there still is the possibility of gathering some materials that are, that are of certain size that can be experimented with at home, and that you can get the right tools to use them. I can imagine that could be a pretty successful way of just doing small exercises.
Okay. Emily. You're muted.
Hey, I'm Emily. I work for Auburn University out at the Rural Studio. But when I was at Mississippi State, this is in response to the question about tools. Now, these aren't making, but students understand space. And I found like the experience of a place, I guess. And so you might have to kind of reframe the like what you're really studying. But the apps on phones, like decibel meters and light meters, now they're not necessarily completely accurate compared to like the building diagnostic tools that you might get, but they are within within the magnitude of itself. So you could understand, it's something to understand luminance values and sound values. That's something that all students have, and it is a good conversation starter. I've used those before, so. You'd be surprised what you can get on your phone and what students all have access to in terms of studying spatial experiences. So,
oh, yeah, that's a great suggestion.
Andrzej?
Hi. Actually, maybe answering Sarah's kind of point and question is that I teach not really design build. I did some robotics, so it's physical, and I teach a lot of smart objects. And one thing I often kind of emphasize with my students when you do a smart design is not to reinvent smoke detector, not to reinvent the light, but take something that is what is around you. And this is kind of old-fashioned economy of means. You take what you have around it and add a new functionality by adding microcontrollers, sensor, and so on. In my case, so I don't want them to design new light. I want them to do a new feature or new property or new behavior of the light. So there may be something going to tools Sarah was mentioning, and I actually had a very similar studio in robotics that I asked them to design construction tools. Maybe they can actually work with something they have around and make it into a tool or into a new process in construction. Like, you know, again, this was maybe my studio in robotics, but I think there is idea of, what you have around you, because that's kind of, it is often possible. A lot of my students in the past were using home workshops to do stuff, but that's a little bit of issue of equity, because it's not everybody has the same access. So maybe there's something slightly more approachable. You can take things, and again, from my smart design courses, take object and add new functionalities, maybe add Arduino sensor, and these things can be actually relatively easy got from Amazon. So again, economy of means and what is around us, and built with this as a kind of response. I think it worked a couple of times on different courses with me, and that's kind of what I'm trying to do now.
Great.
Good.
By the way, thank you everybody for also chiming in the chat box. There's a ton of good ideas and suggestions, so I encourage you to go there again.
I have a question just to put to the group. If, how many of you, or can anyone sort of talk about an experience where you've had to absolutely abandon a project because of the circumstances we're in, and how did you handle that with the students or with your administrators?
I think there was actually one. Oh.
Nina.
Yeah, can you see me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I'm actually not Nina. That's my,
okay.
Yeah, that's my name. It's my daughter's name, actually. It's a long story and I won't go into it. So
okay.
I'm Daniel Winterbaum from the University of Washington. And we do a 2-quarter, we're on a quarter system. So it's 10 weeks, 9 to 10 weeks each quarter. And we typically do the design in the winter quarter, and then we're ready to break ground in the spring. And obviously, just as we're ready to break ground, the virus took shape. And we were mandated to cancel the studio for the same reasons that others have said. No human contact, no classes to be set out in the field. So the client was quite understanding about it, and the decision is made to postpone the studio until next year. The students, I think, are also fairly understanding about it. We had graduate students, undergraduate students. We're dispersing the graduate students to other studios and waiving the requirement, because we have a required capstone studio for the undergraduates. That will be waived this year. I think the real challenge that I'm sort of facing, maybe some of you are, is next year it'll kind of be a construction studio. So I've been pretty adamant that the design build is about design and understand the implications of your design and then being responsible to solve them. And as soon as you take that apart, it's really a very different experience. So I think what we're going to do is try to expand the scope so the students do a little more design and do some implementation of their actual designs, but we're still beholden to the client to build what we have been approved, gone through permitting, and accepted by the community. So you're sort of, at least I feel right now, in this sort of strange position of having to honor what we had committed to, but the whole dynamic has been changed, and we have to bring this new cohort of students into it and make sure that they get what they should get out of it. So that's what we're doing, because we don't really have a choice. We are refining the construction documents because they'll be passed on to the other students. What's been interesting is actually in this hiatus, there's been more community activity around it because it's usually so fast. Now there's been a pause, and we're beginning to address some community issues that maybe were sort of overlooked, and we're addressing those through Zoom meetings and other technology that enable us to address those issues.
Mm-hmm. I noticed in the, thank you. I noticed in the chat window also that Edda Pont had written that their project is on hold until the fall. I wonder if they might be able to speak about what's happening when their project is.
Hi there.
Hello.
Eleanor from Norwich University. And yeah, we were just completed design on a small community kiosk that was approved by the local town select board, and now obviously can't be constructing that. The way we've considered moving forward, and registration for the fall starts next week, so I think we're pretty much committed, is that we'll do a seminar. That's a build seminar. It's a fairly small structure. It's a 6x10 structure. So we're optimistically thinking that we could build it as a seminar. There's already a different design build studio in place for the fall. So it's a little tricky. The students are pretty disappointed because some of them are graduating, so they won't be able to, actualize the design work they did this semester. And yeah, that's our solution. And I guess my questions had been what everyone's talking about, how do we try to replicate that build experience? And a few people spoke to that. And I think I'm becoming more confident based on what others are saying in a sense, is that, we really can't. And we just need to think of other ways. I love the ideas about the models, the full scale sort of one-to-one detail models. Maybe that's the way to go. I love the ideas about thinking about how to do sort of a virtual community follow-up. So we were really engaging a lot of stakeholders in the community, but then we were really trying to get CDs done and material lists made. So we kind of disconnected a little bit from those community stakeholders. So maybe there's an opportunity to create a virtual slideshow that can then go on the local television channel and sort of inform everyone about what's happening. Yeah, so this has been really helpful.
That's an interesting point. One of my 5 contingency plans for my studio is that if we absolutely cannot go back to the project in any way, shape, or form in person this semester, that, like many of you have been saying, that, it would have to be on hold, and we would find some way to engage the stakeholders, the partners later, whether it's through some kind of volunteer summer, or maybe it's another studio or another seminar, or maybe even independent study later on. But I think that we have been, because we've been so focused on doing shop drawings, that we're finding this to be an interesting moment to actually kind of back away from that and think about how to communicate the project to the public a bit more, and thinking about communication and storytelling and narrative.
Yeah.
So I think some of you have been talking about that as well. You know, what's the power of representation in the image? And somebody mentioned something about text in the early part of the chat. Yeah, so I think some of these are really, really aligning with things that I've been thinking about as well. Let's see.
Does anyone else have any other questions or issues you want to bring up?
Somebody's talking about videos. These are great ideas in the chat box. Again, I encourage everybody to look at them. Making how-to videos.
Also, just videos, you can do either real-time, closed circuit at a construction site. You can do videos that are, you know, at the construction site, you know, and have it in the classroom, the virtual classroom, a day later. So there's a number of ways that we can use the technologies that are already available to us to get the information out that would normally take going to a construction site to do.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great idea. Let's see. Yeah, another idea, how to show people to construct 3D models using animation and how-to processes. That's a great idea. Ronit?
Ronit, yeah.
I just was thinking about the question, and I'm sure it's on everybody's minds, which of course we don't know what's next, but the impact that this has on our understanding or thinking about public space and gathering, which is all the things that we generally tend to, work towards. And there was a comment earlier about thinking about the condition we're in right now and how that suggests certain kind of reflection and action. And I think this is, I just would be curious to hear what other people are thinking about that, because it's not just the studio. Maybe the studios are a place to start exploring this, and maybe some of the virtual tools give us means to gather until we can gather again face to face and more in proximity. But just and also that some of the vulnerable communities we're working with are going to be the ones most hit, both by lack of healthcare, loss of jobs. That's a whole other question, but maybe just stick with the question about public space and proximity. And it's too hard a question to think about right now.
Well, I guess that's an interesting question. I'm wondering, how many of you are in, say dense urban areas where it would probably be very hard to do a kind of community engagement project where versus, I think so much of it depends on context. Like I feel like the only reason that there might be some possibility of hope for some future kind of in-person work this semester for us is because the site is a kind of a very empty area generally, that there's nobody out on the street right now anyway. There isn't anybody around. People would be 10 feet apart, at minimum, if not more. The site itself is 100 foot by 100 foot out in a kind of big open field. But if the project were in a kind of, dense area where you would be potentially, bumping into people every day, that would be a very different situation. So, and I guess this is just a sort of long thought on, just our interaction with public space as you're talking about.
So I'm wondering, this is Bob Shibley from the University of Buffalo, but I'm wondering if whether this isn't as much a conversation that Ronit introduced about citizenship as opposed to about public space. And the students we have now are experiencing something that will affect them for the rest of their lives. They're seeing a change in the way the global circumstance establishes a kind of international citizenship. And it scales all the way down to neighborhood and public space, but it's also much broader and global. And I think we have an opportunity to sort of step back and look at the broader pedagogical implications of a pandemic and look at citizenship from a very different perspective and suggest that then we talk about all the ways we know and love the public space and the democratic project it represents. But then for now, we're scaling up for a different motivation for engagement and collaboration. So it seems to me there's a whole pedagogical thread here that's not about the artifact of the public space we make. It's about the attitude that drives the possibility of public space anywhere in a kind of democratic base. So thank you, Ronit, for your question. And I really think there's a tremendous opportunity here for us to take advantage of this.
That is such a great response, Robert, and I really appreciate that. That totally expands my thinking and what we might offer in terms of readings or discussion. And I don't remember the name of the person who offered the comment earlier about thinking that there might be a studio on the other part of the world who could potentially build something. So it actually, in a strange way, the virtual digital connects to another part of the world where we see that the COVID virus isn't anymore. And this kind of local, global citizenship is, yeah, I think that's at the root of it and crosses scale of community. And you're right, this also will affect all of us for a long time. It's very formative. Thank you.
Very good.
Oh, great comment.
Nadia, you have something else?
No, oh, sorry. Okay. No, this is, I love the question about public space. I'm going to have to, I don't know, think on that for a bit, since here in Charlotte, we're talking all about trying to increase density and become less car dependent. But something that this made me think about is we were having, prior to having to go completely online, you know, some conversations about how to incorporate things like climate change and that sort of thing better into our curriculum. And one of the questions came up about the issue of sort of studio culture, and that for those of us who were old enough to remember, you know, the days when we essentially created our own dwelling spaces in the studio, and you know, it was and had this sort of physical space and presence, you know, that now our students come in, they have their laptops, they're in studio during class, but you know, outside of that, they're really not in that space, and they're not necessarily physically together. And I've found the virtual studio experience to be, I thought I was going to hate it. And it's been interesting in terms of the sense of community. I feel like there's a certain amount of focus that, you know, because we're looking at each other very directly one-on-one on the screen. And then my students also have started meeting in small groups outside of the actual, like outside of the time that I'm spending with them. And so the idea of like, what is the community and what is the sort of pedagogy of the community of the studio, I think this is maybe raising some of those issues. I don't know exactly what that means, but that you know, the computer or the digital world is not a sort of loss of everything, but that it might actually be what does it do to the culture of the discipline and the culture of our pedagogy? And, that there might actually be some things that we can learn in terms of, whether it's a certain democratization or, because certainly now everyone is, some people have roommates, some people live alone, but everyone is in a similar kind of state of isolation. And I think that has some implications for a broader conversation. So I don't know, I may ask my students to do some reflections on this. It's a good time for reflection.
Yeah, that's a really good point, which I think someone else made earlier, that this is really, we are sort of talking about the crisis of rapid pivots in our teaching, but it's also a time to reflect. And I think maybe once we get used to a week or two into this world, we can start to think more broadly about it and get our students to sort of really reflect on it in the process.
I noticed, in the chat box that there are a number of people who mentioned something about students feeling disappointed. I'm curious to know how some of you who have started teaching already are adjusting or working with your students to address, how to kind of work in this time when, they thought they were going to do a design build project or something that involved, community engagement, but it's something now quite different.
I don't know that my students seem disappointed yet, but they're anxious to do something. We're at the end of a 2-week extended spring break starting on Monday, and I've put my whole studio on Slack so that we all have a very rapid communication system that allows us to talk or chat at least and explore our chats within the different channels of the projects. And just today, I've got 5 students saying, "Can I do something now? I don't want to wait till Monday." They're really anxious to get started. So I'm trying to start getting them together to sort of jump on some of the things we're going to do next week.
Yeah.
I think that the disappointment is an issue, but it's I think most, at least from my students, they're dealing with it. A lot of them are graduating with MArcs this year, so this is their last chance to do, something in the university.
Mm-hmm.
We just are finishing our first week after spring break, although we had an extended spring break like many others, and I reached out to the students last week to see if they wanted to connect, and they really did. So we had a series of online discussions, and they wanted to get to this. And for you who may be starting up again next week, and I think you all are aware of this, but our students, like all of us, are in utter shock, and we're spending a lot of time talking with them as a group as well as individually, just to help them deal with things that they're dealing with in life right now, whether they're dealing with isolation in a whole new way, dealing with being in places that are very, tight apartments, whatever it is, and helping them figure out how to be productive. For many of them, the studio is incredibly helpful as something to keep them busy and to focus on. And when you're talking about the disappointment, our students are really disappointed because we were just about to start making stuff, which we really hadn't dove into yet in our studio. But I think there's some good suggestions here on how to have them do that individually, because I just don't feel like digital tools, can mimic that experience at all. But I just will reiterate for everyone that I think our students, our dean had a meeting with students online today, and many of the students just reiterated how important it is that the faculty recognize how difficult this is for them, and that they really need time to sort of settle, and that the expectations need to really change in this time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's really important to, you know, the kind of camaraderie that develops during community engagement work and design build and sort of working together is something that really has to come into the studio through in whatever way it can. And I think, you know, how to develop that kind of togetherness in an online way is going to become very important.
And we have a chat from someone from AIAS saying that students are very resilient, which I think is definitely true.
Yeah.
Karen is up, hand up.
Hi, thanks so much. I'm Karen Kuby. I'm from the University of Oregon, where I'm a faculty fellow in design for spatial justice. And my situation is, you know, like all of us on the quarter system, our quarter also starts on Monday. And with all of this, I have lost my community partner because they need to focus completely on helping their community through COVID and can no longer do an external project. So I really appreciate this discussion, and I'm thinking similarly in terms of really peeling back everything we were planning on doing to its most essential and thinking about helping students to understand how to design with empathy and how to follow the lead of projects, you know, environmental justice groups led by lower income people of color who are most impacted by some of these issues. Our studio is on design and health equity. So I would love to hear from the group. I'm really thinking about what exercises we can do that are focused on designing with empathy. And now that we cannot, you know, we cannot we can't ask for anything from this partner that's so busy right now. So we can't ask them to do interviews, etc. So I'm looking at, you know, doing readings instead, but I also we can't get to our books, right? So looking at what online readings there are that my students can do in lieu of interviews with this group, and specifically looking at environmental justice connections. So those are some things I'm dealing with, and I would love any thoughts from the group. Thank you.
Jane Anderson.
Hi there. I was just thinking that it's a very live situation that's unfolding around all of us at the moment, and it's surely going to, in the future, be the stimulus for some need that design build or live projects might meet in the future. So isn't this the time to be digging in and using all the experience that you have from previous situations like Hurricane Katrina, for example, you know, all the knowledge that everybody has, isn't this the time to be passing that on to the students so that they're perhaps predicting how they could intervene in a way that's sensitive? Karen was talking about health and well-being. It's going to expose so much of the vulnerability that we maybe were not fully aware of. And so we should be observing and using the knowledge we have to get ready for when we can help, perhaps in a more design build way. But I think there are things that we can do in a volunteer way, community engagement way right now that could be helpful, or at least contribute, even if we're not leading it. But so I think it's about consolidation, getting ready, sharing information, and helping our students to be prepared for when they could help in a building way, but not assuming that's the only answer.
Mm-hmm. Now, these are great comments. I'm just noting in the chat window that Karen Xiang brought up an idea about not only creating documentation for public awareness, but also thinking about fundraising and how to get organized to set goals and implement and crowdfund for projects. And so maybe there are other ways that the engagement work can pivot to different tasks and different ways to mobilize. Karen, would you like to talk about some of your ideas there?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Karen, and unfortunately, our design build faculty who was in the thick of all of this for our school had to log off. So I'm speaking on our behalf. But so this is actually based on something that we saw happen in a previous project that she ran, where this, we couldn't quite raise enough funds, so we had to be very resourceful. And so a student who was graduating had some room in his elective credits. And so he took a class on, and I forget what the title was called, I'm sorry, but basically he learned how to build an online presence for this design build project that they were working on. Created videos, a profile page for the crowdfund and research into that, and who to reach out. So there was actually a lot of, it was a big learning experience for him, and of course it it helped the project financially. But I feel like that's something, tool, I think a skill or a resource that would absolutely, I'm sure, have a lot of benefit, but isn't necessarily or is crowded out, let's say, in the curriculum in the normal times, right? Because the focus is on the design and construction.
That's great. There are a lot of really great comments in the Zoom. So again, I encourage everybody to look at it. Nina, whose name is not Nina, has mentioned something about role-playing exercises. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Anyway, I think that's you.
Who's that?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we've done a lot of simulation. We work a lot with people with physical and cognitive disabilities. And we've had simulations that really make it a visceral understanding before we do the design process. But certainly, I think you could do a role-playing exercise with Zoom, where each person takes on different identities and approaches the same problem with that lens. I think there was somebody talking about social justice and equity, and how do you do this when the community partner has gone and you can't access those questions. And very often it will elicit different life experiences that can be applicable both to the issues that you're dealing with and certainly to inform the design process. So as I say, we've never done it digitally, but we have done a lot of this with community groups and with our students to try to break their lens and hopefully have them see it through a different viewpoint.
Great. Thanks. As everyone has noted, someone from AIAS is on the call. I'm curious if there are students here that are interested in sharing their thoughts.
Hi, it's Karma Israelson. I'm the new-ish executive director from AIAS. I know some of you, but it's been great to sit on these calls and participate. So I really appreciate the conversation and the discussion, not only from tonight, but from previous sessions. I will say what we're hearing from our members right now, which has been touched on here, is certainly a bit of shock and awe in terms of this rapid pivot to online. We obviously have several of our members that have not been able to get back on campus. So they left for spring break with their suitcase and then have not been able to return. So we have several of our students that are really grappling with trying to figure out how to get clothes and supplies and the things that they need for school. So it's been an interesting cycle in the last 10 to 12 days as the pivot to online has been made. And at the same time, what we're hearing from our students and even from our board at this point is students are really, really desperate to get back to sort of connecting with their peers. They're really excited to get back into connecting with community and feeling like that they can use their skills and problem solving abilities and sort of those hard skills and soft skills to make an impact and to be able to contribute to developing a community, even if it's an online environment. We have several students who I think are really interested in how to collaborate differently and engage differently, specifically with faculty, because in an online environment, and several of you have touched on this, it's less about critique with the student standing behind the faculty and more about that two-way dialogue and discussion, and that idea of refinement and continual improvement, and understanding the process by which design gets better and better through collaboration and through sort of measured risk-taking and failure. We have a lot of students that are really, really interested in being able to participate in the discussions about studio in particular, because it's such an important and critical role and a big piece of their program. They are desperate to understand how this looks in the future and really want to be active contributors to the discussion of how this pivot to online education happens. I will admit, like, I did most of my undergrad and my graduate program online, so it's a modality that I'm very, very comfortable with, and also very much appreciate and recognize the challenges that are presented, particularly in studio, of moving to an online format in basically a week and a half. We're going to be sending out, we've been working with Dr. Monti and his team to put together sort of a temperature check pulse survey with our colleagues and obviously members of ACSA. That'll be going out, if not tomorrow, early next week. And so we'd love to have your feedback and input on that survey. We're working really, really hard at the national office to craft resources and programming and intervention that's going to be valuable to our members, and at the same time recognizing that, at least for us and for our board, I think this is a really pivotal and unique and magical moment to take our relationship with ACSA and AIS, but more importantly with faculty and students, and deepen it in a way that I don't know that we have had a moment like this to be able to really transform that collaboration and partnership with students and faculty. So really have enjoyed these conversations, and certainly very excited to continue this discussion as we navigate through this really trying in many cases, but I think really important and pivotal and unique opportunity that we have here to rethink how we are in the world and how we educate our young people and future emerging professionals.
Great. Thanks, Karma. That's really great. And I think it's really important that we engage our students in what we are planning to do as early as possible. So we have about 10, 12 minutes left in our sort of scheduled time. If anyone has anything that they wanted to bring up, or any topic that we haven't touched on.
I actually have another question for everybody. So I'm curious to know if there's anybody out there in your schools where faculty are thinking about changing their project entirely due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So we have had, I've been really heartened by the number of students and faculty who are volunteering to do many things at my institution. And a couple of the things that have emerged is a lot of people are really interested in making masks and using 3D printing facilities to fabricate PPE. Another thing that has come up is that I think New York State AIA has an effort going on where architects that have experience in health facilities and others are looking at ways of converting hotels and other buildings into hospital situations. So, and this is all volunteer at the moment. This is like faculty and students are volunteering for, and not just faculty and students, but also community members and people in the profession in our city. I'm imagining that if this continues, that some of this could become part of a studio project, but it would have to be adapted very quickly, obviously. But I'm just curious if there's anybody out there who's pivoting very radically to deal with the situation at hand. Rusty.
Yeah, of course we are. I mean, mercy. None of us here are able to do anything we set out to do. And I mean, I honestly can't decide if this is like the most depressing conversation I've ever heard or the most exciting conversation I've ever heard. You know, it's amazing that design, build, service, learning, engaged, you know, faculty are just getting on with the getting on best they can. That's what we do. But at the same time, it's sort of, what can you do? I mean, in some ways, this has been liberating, because unlike our colleagues that are teaching paper projects on studios, there's absolutely no chance we're going to be able to deliver the content or the curriculum or the pedagogical structure that we plan to. So we get to do whatever we want, right? We're in triage mode. We got to get our kids out of this semester. We're on semesters right now. We got to get them out of this semester as best and fast as we can. Right? I mean, that's what we're faced with. You know, projects that are buttoned up, projects that are half complete, construction sites that are vacant, you know, sending kids home with design projects that will never be built, into an uncertain world. Can I get a portfolio project out of it? What's the future of design education? Why are we doing what we're doing? How is this different than what we might be doing on this otherwise? I mean, I think, you know, the fact that that's not the conversation that's going on, or maybe that's the next conversation that needs to go on, that's the conversation we're really interested in having. You know, why do we do this? Why is it important? How is it different? How is it relevant? How is it going to survive? Is it going to get cut because we're all going to do our dead level best to figure out how to do it really well? And so it actually makes kind of what we do not relevant? Or are we going to say, you know what, we can't do what we do? And we got to draw a line in the sand and say, this is important. And it's important that we do it face to face. And it's important that we do it in our communities. And it's important that we do it hand to face with our clients. You know, that's the conversation. We got to get through this kind of crisis moment and look over the horizon. And honestly, I'm optimistic. I'm really optimistic about it. To be honest, that's what we do. I mean, I see Steve Badane's there. He's laughing. You know, he's our granddaddy, right? I mean, he did this, you know, through the Irish potato famine, and he did it through the plague. And so, you know, Steve, I mean, you know, get somebody to teach you how to use the technology and talk to us. Tell us what we need to be doing. Tell us what we need to be thinking about. Telling us what matters right now, man. Come on, don't just sit there. You know, to lead us to the promised land. Tell us what to do. You're on mute, Steve. Come on, dude.
Hey, am I unmuted, Rusty? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay. Well, this is kind of a shock for us because we were about to start. We do in 10 weeks, we design and build a small community project. Of course, the class works as a group, both in the design and in the construction. So we're just tossing that out pretty much, but we've kept the client, Jake Labar, who co-teaches the class, I believe is here as well, and also taught with Rusty down at Rural Studio. One thing that we found that sort of sticks that we can probably still use, we're going to keep the same client. We're doing a little farm stand for a local farmer's market here on Whidbey Island, north of Seattle. We'll probably build it next year, but we'll probably keep the same project and try and figure, we usually start the quarter building a bunch of stuff out of paper, bridges and towers and things like that. Maybe we can still do that. And then we switch to a sheet of plywood, maybe forget that part. But we do figure out a way to have a group design process and not this sort of individual competition thing that takes place in so many design build studios. And since Jake has joined us in the class and as a faculty, he's requested that we do a complete set of drawings in Revit before we start construction. You know, I don't know how to do that kind of stuff. So we always used to just start with a model and start building. And in many ways, the students like this Revit part particularly well because it makes them employable. So I believe what we're going to do is try and keep that and give it. We have the class of 16 students, 10 weeks, and about half of the students are undergrads who don't really know how to do it. And most of them are graduating. Some are dual majors, architecture and construction management, and will be going for an extra year. There's a other half are graduate students in the middle of the program, so who may know how to do it. But at least we're gonna, I don't know. We're having a meeting tomorrow. We're doing research here by listening to everybody, and Jake and myself and Jorge Guzman, who is a former student who's helping us with the class, will talk tomorrow and figure out what to do on Monday. Our students are scattered all over the place, including different time zones.
Yeah, I mean that's what we're talking about, all kinds of different stuff, right? We're talking about, you know, engagement. We're talking about place-based stuff. We're talking about design build, you know, and so there's so many different, you know, objectives here relative to how we're contributing to our accredited responsibilities of teaching architecture. The thing, I could be wrong-minded, but the thing that sort of separates this work is the build part, right? And I know that there's this focus on engagement, right? But I can tell you, I got all of my colleagues on campus are deeply invested in engagement, and they're having the same exact conversations and the same exact responses that we're all having here. You know, we can do this, we can do that work. It's challenging, but we can do it from anywhere. You know, what we can't do is build projects in place. And I wonder if we're figure out a way to be really good at kind of all the other parts that get stacked on top of the build part of design build engagement work, if we're not killing ourselves, if we're not making ourselves obsolete. You know, what is valuable about the way we do things? What is it that's worth keeping? Because I can tell you, every university out there is faced with real challenges, real health challenges, real financial challenges. And that if we're good at this, what we love and what we believe in is going to go away. And I personally want to engage in a conversation about that, about why this work is important, why what we do is important, why it's worth keeping, why it's worth fighting for. I understand, you know, that we're in a crisis, right, that we got to get through. But when we get through it, what remains is going to be the question. I can tell you, the more ground we cede to what's important, is we're never going to get it back. So,
yeah, I think the universities are quite happy, Rusty, to have everybody working online, because that's where they want it to go anyway.
You better believe it. Us being successful and giving reports back to our deans and department heads and school heads and all those sorts of things, our program chairs, that, hey, things are going great, we're solving problems, we're doing good. That is to our detriment.
Well, we need all those tools and all that expense and all that liability of building crap.
Yeah,
maybe.
Yeah, if we can meet our objectives otherwise.
On the other hand, a lot of students sign up because of the Rural Studio where you are, and because of our Design Build program. It's a huge magnet that brings students to the school, and they have to tolerate it for the most part.
Well,
So
we'll see if that lasts.
We have two other hands raised, and it's 8 o'clock. I wonder, Jeff, what do you want to do here?
Well, I mean, we don't have to end it immediately, but let's, looks like someone dropped out, but Jake is.
Well, I was just going to echo what Steve and Rusty said a little bit, but also, you know, it is, I think it's important to, I mean, we're on the West Coast, we're in Seattle, so it's kind of, I would imagine we're more freaked out than most currently, but it seems like the citizenship question is a great one, because as a good citizen, we should be not spreading this around currently. So I don't think we act like, how do we do business as usual now? I think the students should really realize that this is one big impact. They can have a really big impact by not being around each other temporarily. And those of us on quarters, you know, that is gone in a blink of an eye. Semesters are so much longer, but even those, this is kind of a little blip, I think. And so if the students can really recognize the power that they have by having civic engagement and the power that they can have by not putting other people in danger for 3 weeks, 5 weeks, whatever it is. I think that's the main lesson. I want them to learn to be safe and to keep other people safe. And then the design and the building skills, those can kind of pile on later.
Great, thanks. Joyce, let's give the last word to Jane, unless there's anyone else.
Hi, just replying to the last from a UK perspective, where we tend to call them live projects rather than design build. So we're not completely invested in the building part. It's just all the way from the community engagement, and it may end in a building, it may not. And because we don't have the land, the opportunity that I believe you have in the US. I think one thing that we've had to focus on as a result is the pedagogy. And I think that it's so clear to me, looking at what all of you have done, that it's so much more than just the building what you do. So I don't think Rusty's existential crisis is necessary. I think that, you know, what you do is so much, that what the students learn is so much more than just to become a builder, and you know it, and it is just about, you know, what Steve Boudin said about his immediate reaction was, we're not giving up on the group work, we're still doing it together. That's a huge signifier of these kinds of projects, for example.
Yeah, I agree, Jane. Don't disagree at all. The work is absolutely the side effect. The built project is the side effect of all the collateral learning the students do. But we do it through building. And so all the proposals that I hear today are to do it in some other way. And when we do that, we give it up. And maybe that, you know, maybe that is, you know, okay. And maybe I'm old and I don't know how to do it any other way besides building. It's the way we do it. It's the way that works. And I don't know that it's an existential crisis, but it's a crisis. What we give up, we will not get back. That's been my experience in education. And we are extraordinarily inefficient design build programs. We're extraordinarily inefficient. It's university speak for expensive, for the way we deliver a whole lot of content to very often a very few students with a whole lot of resources. I just think gotta be really careful.
But how long's a project? You know, it's not going to end in a building in this semester, but that's going to be down the line when it's really needed, when all of these vulnerabilities have been exposed. It's going to happen, but it's just going to be a longer, more stretched project.
Oh yeah, I agree. I mean, you know, I'll sit here at Rural Studio, and I mean, I feel fine, right? We've been around for almost 30 years. We'll be around for 30 years more. Design build programs are carried on the backs of individual faculty that have no resources, no funding, no support. You know, they're working nights and weekends, double, triple time, you know, on top of what their universities expect. All that shit's going to go away if we're not careful. If those of us who can sort of communicate to our universities, all 150 plus of them in the United States and Canada are represented by ACSA, why this particular type of education is important. It's gonna go away. Maybe not for all of us, but for a lot of us. And those of us who are gonna be around it for a while, I'm just committed to doing what we can to communicate how important it is, how vital it is. You know, it was only 25 years ago, there were only 6 design build programs in the United States and Canada. Only 6. And it can go away like that. So we gotta, I would say that the most useful thing that some of us in this group can do, if you guys are interested, is engage in that conversation about how to keep it for all of us. That's not probably a good way to end, Rusty. Yeah, no, I know. I know. Did I explain that I'm optimistic?
Yes, I've been doing it for 50 years. I don't think I have so much more time left to do it, but I'm going to try and do it. And I really believe that it is important, and the students just love it. And they get so much out of it. It's really worth the extra effort it takes to teach these kind of classes, and I hope they do return. We'll do the best we can under these circumstances, and I don't think this is a death knell. I agree with what Rusty says also about the universities love this online stuff. It's a lot cheaper. It doesn't have all the problems of having real faculty. I'm a little worried about that in the long range, but I hope we can all make it through our careers and build a lot of great stuff. That's a better ending.
Yes, definitely. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, thank you all for such great conversation and for the great ideas. And I mean, I think if there's anything that this experience is making me feel is that doing work out there is so incredibly important, and working with our hands is important. And it's something that I'm missing terribly right now. But yeah, no, this is a great conversation, and I think we should, Jeff, is this all being saved? What's happening with
It's being recorded.
Okay.
So unless I completely screw it up, there'll be a recording available. ACSA will probably post it by next week, I would assume. Mike Monty's supposedly on vacation this week. But yeah, thank you so much, everybody. It's been really good. And we'll follow up maybe with another round at some point. And good luck, everyone.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.